Hello, everyone. My name is John Schramski, and I'm a master's student at Michigan State University studying weed science under Dr. Christy Sprague. And today I'm going to talk about part of my master's research, which is controlling Marestail or horseweed in no-till soybeans using cover crops. So horseweed continues to be an issue in Michigan due to an increase in adoption of reduced tillage practices. Of course, herbicide-resistant populations widespread throughout the state, rotation restrictions for some of our effective soil-applied residual herbicides in our specialty and vegetable rotations. And then perhaps the biggest issue is prolonged and unpredictable emergence. So this figure shows horseweed emergence in a Michigan field in plants per square foot from early May through late August in 2017. And then if we add in 2018, in 2019, I'd just like to point out a few things. So in each of these years, we had horseweed emergence throughout most of the growing season. And we also see differences each year in times of peak emergence, making this weed very difficult to control for growers to find a key or critical period for control. So we were curious as to how winter wheat and cereal rye being planted in the fall and having great biomass accumulation in the spring could be utilized to help suppress horseweed. And previous research has actually found that cereal rye and winter wheat suppress winter annual weeds, early summer annual weeds, and horseweed. Cereal cover crop biomass and weed suppression are positively correlated. So the more cover biomass, the better weed suppression. The effects of cereal cover crops on soybean yield have been, they have varied from no effect, a negative effect, or positive effect. And we know that planting green increases cover crop biomass compared with terminating your cover early, but there's limited data on how this affects weed suppression. And so for those unfamiliar, planting green is the process of no-till planting into a live and green cover crop, such as seen in this photo. The cover is then able to grow an additional week or so and is terminated after the soybeans start to crack the ground and leaves extra residue throughout the growing season, as can be seen with this cereal rye and soybeans. So the objectives of this study were to investigate the effects of fall planted cereal cover crops for management of herbicide-resistant horseweed. Our first hypothesis was that cereal covers will suppress horseweed compared with no cover, and cereal rye will suppress horseweed greater than winter wheat. Our second hypothesis was that higher seeding rates will provide more cover and suppress horseweed more than lower seeding rates. And lastly, we hypothesized that planting green will provide more cover and suppress horseweed more than early terminated covers. So this experiment was set up as a split plot, with the main plots being arranged in a RCBD. Our main plots consisted of cereal rye and winter wheat, both planted at a low and a high population, so 60 and 120 pounds of seed per acre, and a no cover control. Our first split was termination timing, with our covers being terminated 1 week prior to soybean planting with 32 ounces per acre of glyphosate, and 1 week after soybean planting with 32 ounces of glyphosate per acre, and that second treatment being termed planting green. And then our last split was our post-herbicide, either just to control, so glyphosate alone to control other weeds, or dicamba post. And we did this to look at whether the cover residue can control mare's tail late into the growing season. And so the research presented today are from 3 site years throughout Michigan. So we had a grower's field in Isabella County in 2018 with a known horseweed problem. Same grower up in Isabella County, but a different field in 2019. And then at the MSU Agronomy Farm in 2019. Our cover planting dates and soybean planting dates are listed under each of the sites. And we planted the dicamba-resistant soybean variety Asgrow 26X8 in 30-inch rows at a population of 152,000 seeds per acre. And so at the time of early termination, or 1 week before soybean planting, our cover crops were at the growth stage Feeks 5 to 6, Winter wheat was around 10 inches tall, cereal rye was around 15 inches tall. And in the photos below, you can see how each of these covers looked at this time. So this is 1 week before soybean planting. And then looking at the amount of biomass accumulated by each of these cover crops. So to set up my figures for the rest of this presentation, the yellow bars are wheat cover crops, the green bars are rye, and then the lighter shade of each would be the lower seeding rate, while the darker is the higher seeding rate. And so looking at cover biomass in pounds per acre, we can see that in Isabella County, 2018, cereal rye provided 79% more cover biomass than winter wheat. We saw a few differences in Isabella in 2019 due to poor establishment and cold and wet spring. But then at MSU in 2019, similar story, we saw 241% more cover biomass by cereal rye than winter wheat. And transferring this over to percent ground cover, we had similar results. So we found that cereal rye at Isabella in 2018 provided 14% more ground cover at this time. We had few differences at Isabella in 2019, and then once again at MSU in 2019, cereal rye provided 14% more ground cover than winter wheat. And now looking at horseweed biomass at the time of early termination. So we add in that brown bar for our no cover strip, and we can see that cover crops reduce horseweed biomass by 66% at the time of early termination, so 1 week before soybean planting. And within our covers, we had no difference between wheat and rye or the cover rates. So 1 week after that early termination, soybeans were no-till planted, and that can be seen planting green here into cereal rye, what that looked like. And then our planting green treatments were allowed 1 additional week to grow, and as the soybeans started to correct the ground, we terminated those. And so at the time of planting green termination, our cover crops had grown to Feeks stages 10.5. Winter wheat was around 20 inches tall. Cereal rye was around 45 inches tall. And we can see what those cover crops look like in the photos below at this time. And now looking at cover crop biomass at the time of planting green termination. So this figure looks very similar to the early termination figure, except if you look at the y-axis, we notice that our biomass is about 3 to 4 times greater than it was, but very similar story. So we had a 38% increase, or 38% more cover biomass by cereal rye than winter wheat at Isabella in 2018. Once again, few differences at Isabella in 2019, and at MSU in 2019. Cereal rye was nearly double the biomass of winter wheat. And we measured ground cover once again when the soybeans got to be about VE, and averaged over termination timing. Cereal rye provided 10% more ground cover than winter wheat, and then averaged over our cover crops. Delaying termination by planting green provided 25% more ground cover when soybeans were VE than our early terminated covers. And now looking at horseweed biomass at the time of planting green termination, so 1 week after soybean planting. We saw no differences at Isabella in 2018, and the reason we believe that our brown no cover bar is so low is due to other winter annual weeds such as chickweed and dandelion suppressing Marestail like we would have expected our cover crops to do. But then at Isabella in 2019, we saw that winter wheat reduced horseweed biomass 59% and cereal rye 87% compared with the no cover. And then at MSU in 2019, we had an 87% reduction of horseweed biomass by winter wheat and a 98% reduction of horseweed biomass by cereal rye compared with the no cover. So 5 to 7 weeks after planting, we applied our post treatments of either just glyphosate alone or glyphosate and dicamba. And at this time, so our cover crops were planted in strips across the screen following the soybean rows. And at this time in our early terminated covers, it's tough to decipher between our cover treatments. looking at our planting green treatments, on the other hand, there are distinct differences in cover and cover residue left over. And so at this location, any green that you see between soybean rows is actually horseweed. So looking at our strips of cover crops, we're looking at wheat at the high rate, no cover, rye at the high rate, rye at the low rate, and wheat at the low rate. And so I'd just like to quickly point out, if we look at cereal rye at the high rate and just compare the amount of cover residue left over in our early terminated treatments versus our planting green treatments on the right, you can really see a distinct difference in what delaying termination does for biomass and residue later on in the season. And now looking at how that affects horseweed biomass. So at the top of this table, we have our horseweed biomass in our no cover plots. And then under that, we have our early terminated treatments of each of the cover crops. And so for our 3 site years, we can see that our early terminated covers did not consistently reduce horseweed biomass compared to our no cover. So we had wheat at the high rate in Isabella in 2019 did, rye at the high rate at Isabella in 2019 did, and then the 2 high seeding rates at MSU in 2019. So those are highlighted in green. When I add in our planting green treatments, however, we see that all cover treatments reduced horseweed biomass compared to the no cover in all site years. And the only differences between cover crop treatments in the planting greens was that the wheat at the low rate at Isabella in 2018 had slightly less reduction. And so this is just a zoomed in photo to show again what these plots look like at this time. So we have a no cover on the left and a cereal rye at the high rate terminated early in the middle of the screen, and then a cereal rye at the high rate terminated planting green on the right of the screen. And any horseweed suppression here on after was basically a result of whether dicamba was applied post or not. So we're going to move into soybean yield. So what we found were that soybean yields were higher with early terminated covers compared with no cover in 2 out of the 3 site years when dicamba was applied post. And then we can see that within our cover treatments, none of them are significantly different from each other. And we believe that we only saw an advantage with covers compared to no cover when dicamba was applied post, because when we left with just glyphosate post, the late season horseweed emergence basically negated any advantages of horseweed suppression early by the covers and kind of outshadowed that in soybean yield. So we had a 50% higher yields in Isabella in 2018 and 43% higher yields in cover crops compared to no cover in Isabella in 2019. And then looking at planting green, we saw that soybean yields were higher with planting green covers compared with no cover in all site years, regardless of dicamba or regardless of a post dicamba or not. So we saw overall 31% increase in yields, and no differences once again between our cover treatments. And so in conclusion, we found that winter wheat and cereal rye suppressed horseweed until the time of post herbicide application. Cereal rye produced more cover biomass, provided more ground cover, and suppressed horseweed greater at the time of termination than winter wheat. However, horseweed biomass at the time of post application and soybean yield were not affected by cover species. Seeding rate had little effect on horseweed suppression or soybean yield. And planting green cover crops produced more cover biomass, provided more ground cover, and suppressed horseweed until the time of post application greater than early terminated cover crops. Soybean yields were higher with planting green cover crops compared with no cover in all site years, regardless of our post application. And so implications: growers should consider planting cereal rye at a low or high seeding rate in the fall to help manage horseweed and no-till soybeans the following year. And when managed properly, planting green improves horseweed suppression to help maximize soybean yield. And for future research, Christy and her team are going to look at integrating fall-seeded cereal cover crops with soil-applied residual herbicide programs. So those programs that where we see effective chemical control, we're going to see how the addition of cover crops in conjunction could help. And then look at other cultural practices such as narrow row soybeans to increase shading effect on horseweed. And then we'd also like to transfer these results to other crops such as dry edible beans and sugar beets. And with that said, I'd like to thank Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee and Project Green for funding my research, and thank you for watching this video.